Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Johnny Wu. I'm the VP of Communication here for OCA Greater Cleveland. This is our first live stream to the group, and hopefully we can do this every month, once a month, to introduce different people from the United States. And today we have the honor to have David Moriya. He is a media activist. So hi, David. Welcome to our live stream.
Hey, Johnny. How's it going? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I'd like to have everybody to know about you a little bit. So why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm an entertainment activist. I work a strong Asian lead. So the idea is to kind of look at diversity, equity, inclusion from the Asian American viewpoint. We look at Hollywood. We're asking for diversity, equity, inclusion on representation within the media, behind the scenes, and in the writers' room. But half the time, they kind of just get lost and put to the wayside, whether it's our fault for not working too much or not having issues with education. Sometimes we're not taught how to do screenwriting and filmmaking because we're all kind of taught to go to lawyers and doctors. And so we're just now getting into this process of these generations of Asians to coming and looking at the film industry as a viable career, whether it is in screenwriting, as a manager, as an agent, all the way to executive suite. There's just not a lot of Asians up and down the gamut of Hollywood. So we want to look at the idea of how do we start to change that industry so that our stories are being told. There's tons of writers and stories that need to be told, but we're having an issue where they don't think that Asians, because Asians are only 6% of the population, they think that they shouldn't do marketing because of that. We want to change that idea because not only Asians don't only watch Asian shows, and that's not the way to think it. Once you start not putting enough marketing money into Asian films, then the film crashes, and then you don't think it does very well because it's an Asian film, but you didn't do the marketing correctly. So we want to figure out these ideas and what the systemic issues are within the Hollywood industry against Asian Americans, because there's a lot to talk about, and we want to start having those conversations.
Right. That's actually, I think, very good. I think when I met you over there in Clubhouse, which is how we ran into each other and wanted this room, I was very intrigued and enjoyed your conversation you had with everybody there. So one thing that I remember you mentioned that you are a Japanese American living here for many years, 100 years. So you went through a lot from your family, right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that you caught my attention a lot when you mentioned about we should not use the word internment camp. And would you mind explaining a little bit about this? Because I think a lot of people in my community still think the word internment camp should be used more. So we don't understand the differences, and please educate us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think that the word internment, I always use it with quotes. It's widely known, and sometimes it gets the point across that we know what we're talking about, versus concentration camps, which is kind of related to the Holocaust. But in the Japanese American community, especially in the activists, we don't use internment because the word internment only applies to Japanese or people of alien citizenship. They're not citizens of America or not citizens of your country. So if it was an internment camp, it'd only be back in the 40s, Japanese who had immigrated from Japan who were coming in to do that. But instead, 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans who were born in America with the 14th Amendment as their citizenship, birthright citizenship, were taken away. Their citizenship was taken away and put into these camps. So you can't really call them internment camps at this point because they're not only for aliens, they're for citizens. And so we call them concentration camps. We consider them concentration camps versus the death camps in the Holocaust. Those are two very different things, but nonetheless, they're concentration camps in general. So we don't use the term internment anymore, generally because it kind of minimizes what the structures were. They were very much concentration camps all around the country. So there's just not enough that we are taught about it. In the education system, it might be a paragraph, it might be a page. You'd be lucky. But at the same time, there's so much that the history of those 3-4 years that people went through, that my family went through, that just aren't discovered. So my job is to teach about it, and particularly through television and entertainment.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that update, because I did a documentary about the Japanese American in Cleveland, and we used the word internment camp. So that's maybe 20 years ago. So now I probably should go back then and edit the title a little bit to make it a little bit more current in that sense. And that's unfortunately, in the sense of we are in the today's society, we still have a problem in moving forward in the media industry, just because we don't look like the other in most other European person, and we do look very much Asian American. So can you tell us a little bit about certain things that you have seen that we think that we should do better in the media wise?
As Asian Americans, that we can do better?
Yeah.
Sure. You know what? I think the biggest thing is I tell everybody is education. You know, educate yourself in everything. If you follow your curiosity, right? So if you're interested in something like cooking, okay, so you wouldn't just start cooking and then just continue cooking the way you know how to cook. I think the better thing to do is to learn how to cook, fail a few times, and then go Google it. Go to YouTube, go to some cookbooks, buy some cookbooks, and watch Food Network. Find different things that interest you and continue to learn different processes and how things work. There was this great YouTube thing on talking about the shrimp chips that we eat and how they're made, how the starch of rice is very interesting on the science of it. So the things that you think you know, there's more to learn. It's the same thing with the entertainment industry, right? So if you're doing something like screenwriting, how much screenwriting knowledge do you know? How much have you practiced? How much have you read on either the instructional books or theory books or even just scripts in general? It's always more to learn. If you're a director, keep directing and directing your films. But if you keep directing poorly, you're only going to continue directing poorly and practice poorly. When we were in band camp stuff, they used to say, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So if you practice poorly, you're going to keep practicing poorly, and then you're going to think that's the only way to do it. So just for film stuff, like, continue learning. For me, it's historical dramas, history. I can find history just fascinating because it's an endless depth of knowledge that can be learned, whether it's just through culture or just through the events that have happened in the past in America or anywhere around the world that we just don't know about. Last night, we were in a Lao room, and like, I know Laotian people exist. I know Lao exists, but I have no idea about the country. And so I stayed in that room. I learned about how many bombs were being dropped about America. I'm like, these are amazing stories of this lost war that we don't talk about. So there's so much to learn. I just say for media people, learn the industry, learn how the media works, learn how managers work. There's so much to learn that we can't just keep going about it like we're just going to keep trying. Learn.
Right. Totally agree. Yes. I mean, I get fascinated. I mean, every time I join one room that you're there, I just want to be in a quiet audience, listen. And there's so much to take, and I can't even take notes because I was so busy editing and listening at the same time. So I shouldn't have done that, but that's how I am. There's couple things that you mentioned on the rooms, and I think is kind of important to me. One of the items you talk about is the issues with cultural appropriations. Tell us a little bit what is happening right now in the entertainment industry.
Cultural appropriation is just this idea. It's looking at it the way that who's kind of making the most money and the benefiting of the stories. So the biggest thing I can kind of reference to right now is Cobra Kai, right? Yeah. Based on the Karate Kid, Pat Morita, a lot of story behind him and his story. They even have him as he was in Manzanar, he's the 442nd, like all of that. But in Cobra Kai, there are no Asian leads in the whole film out of the 30 episodes that are there. Everybody's white. I mean, I think the story, generally I'll say the story's great. I think the show's fun, but there's only two Asian reoccurring roles, but one is a literal sidekick and who doesn't know how to fight, and the other guy's a really bad jerk. He's the best jerk around, but he's a jerk, and so he's still the enemy. And at the end of the season, not spoiling anything, they're at the Vietnam War, and so they're still the enemy. That's a problem. And if you look at all the writers, they're all white except for one black guy. All the directors, only two episodes are directed by a Japanese person. Everybody else is kind of white. Like, who's making the most money at this point based on the Karate Kid, which is karate is Okinawan karate? Like, nobody, they're not really paying the respect. They're kind of just taking the fun, cool stuff about martial arts and then giving it to these white people to do the story, which is based in Los Angeles, where there's a ton of Asians. You could have hired anybody to direct, writers, all these things that could have been better, well done about it. Again, the show is really fun. I mean, watch it if you love the Karate Kid, but understanding what that means and how the money's being spent, who's telling the story really matters. Again, with like something people contest about Mulan, like four white writers, white directors, creatives, all up and down the gambit. Yes, representation on screen, but who's telling the story also really matters. If someone's writing my story, like characters are real people, like they're supposed to be the real people. If any non-Asian person writes that character, they're just going to miss something. You can never fully flesh them out as a full character. Right. I think even if you just have a cultural consultant, you're only going to get so much. I think it's really important that we're letting Asians have positions of power and authority to tell these stories of Asian people.
Yeah. So I got questions already, so I'm going to pull it up on the screen so you can take a look at it too.
Yeah, it's cool. How the access opportunities for Asian once in a while is good visibility, then it goes away. Yeah, so I do see that there's real progress because more are being made. Yes, Crazy Rich Asians, the money, well, Parasite. They're continually keep coming. However, I think there is the issue that we're not in the spaces of positions of power to make these stories happen. So Joy Luck Club, Crazy Rich Asians, those are the two stories that are Hollywood based for sure. We're given the money, but so many films are being independently made. So Minari was recent, The Farewell. I think everybody just kind of pulled the money together, and I think it's really great. But what I would like to see is Hollywood to say, we need to fund more films. The reason why they're just not, I think they think again, back to the marketing, they think there's not enough population to look at it.
Yeah.
But there's so many more to do it. So the opportunities, they're there, but we need to start really advocating for ourselves, really coming together as a community, pointing things out, showing them. I was given a note that's saying companies are looking at their DEI, and when they'd rather either be doing it, telling us they're doing it very well, or telling us they're doing it not very well. So I think they're being receptive, but for what I see is the diversity, equity, inclusion departments in these spaces, they don't have any Asians in the department really speaking up. And if they are, they're the only Asian in the group. So their voices get like kind of shoved down a little bit. Yeah. Like that's not the priority. Like it's not a priority, but we need to start making an equal priority within all the diversities and initiatives. So, also then who's telling that story too? Can't just say Asian, right? That might be a Chinese American person. Like, are they only doing Chinese stories? Are they also doing all the other stories? Because we have to be championing for all of our stories, no matter which race and ethnicity we are.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have a hard time. Well, I enjoy Cobra Kai, the series, but I have a hard time figuring out why there's not lots of representation for Asian Americans. There is a Hispanic representation, there's African American, but somehow the Asian American is kind of forgotten or just had a very, very minor role into it. Mm-hmm. Then I was in one Clubhouse room and one lady, she actually did consulting for Netflix, and she said something quite interesting. Almost more than 94% of people working there are white.
Yeah.
So that might be the reason, that because we are in the industry where there's lack of diversity involvement throughout the whole process. So the voices are forgotten.
So you brought that up, and I want to point something out. How this ever is going to turn out is fine. But if you actually look at Netflix's missions, right? Their missions are really great. They're saying diversity, equity, inclusion, making it work. They actually have strong Black lead, strong trans lead, strong LGBTQ lead, and strong female lead, and even strong brown lead. But they left out strong Asian lead. That was one of the reasons why I took the name. I was like, you left out the Asians. Why? You have a whole YouTube channel talking about strong Black lead and what it's doing, but only one video for Always Be My Maybe? Like, where are the Asians in this whole thing? Where's the conversation? Yeah. We need to start pushing for that. And
I guess they're doing better because there's a new Netflix show. It's called about Bling, Asian Bling Empire. Bling Empire. And it's weird. It's almost looking like a reality TV show of Asian Americans in LA. And I feel a little bit weird just because it's not the true representation of Asian Americans, actors, and so it's more a reality TV show, scripted reality TV show type. And I feel like most of us may not going to be identifying with that kind of a show because we're not living that world. That's a different kind of world.
So actually, I love Bling Empire. I mean, I'm not a crazy rich Asian, but there is one dude who is not rich. Like he's the outsider, right? So I think Kevin's great, and I might not be the rich people. We're not a rich family. But at the same time, I found a lot of themes that were very similar to what my family goes through, just relationship-wise, because relationships are relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself yelling at the screen, like, oh, it. And so I know I hate reality TV show, but like I was dying for that. I'm dying for season 2. I'm looking forward to watching House of Ho. Another Netflix show I want to point out, because they just had a streaming today. I'm actually like in the middle of watching it. It's
Mm-hmm.
Finding Ohana. It's kind of like the Goonies meets Hawaii, and it's actually, it seems really cool. I'm enjoying it. It's like this kids show adventures, and so I think they're doing better. I just think that their whole system within their Netflix could be pushing a little further and talking about the inclusion.
Totally. So we got a couple of questions here. I'm going to show you another one here.
I already thought that Harold and Kumar was still in part of the representation. Yeah, I mean, Harold and Kumar was one of the OGs. It's something that didn't base itself on being Asian, but you had two people there. And I think that's a huge part of understanding.
David, you might have to repeat yourself. You cut off again.
Oh, my apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, but you froze it.
Okay. Harold and Kumar, great movie. I mean, one of the OG movies of Asian representation, South Asian and Korean Asian, right? So you have this two people just doing the thing. They didn't have to make it about Asian identity. I don't think it needed to, but they went to the college and there was a whole Asian party. Some of it was kind of wild, but like at the same time, that's fun. What was really great about it was there's two different Asians from different cultures still being friends. We don't see that very often. Sometimes you see an Asian show, it's like the one race of the show, something like Fresh Off the Boat or Crazy Rich Asians, but to have two different cultures come in, be friends, I want to see more of that. I want to see cultures that we don't see connecting with each other. Like, if me and Japanese, my family has been over here over for 100 years. So I actually didn't have this whole Korean Japanese divide because my family came before the occupation. But I've been finding Korean people coming to me like, David, it's actually really nice to meet you because we don't get to talk to Japanese people very often because my parents, my grandparents said, don't like the Japanese. And so we're finding this new barrier breaking, and I'd love to see that more in television. And
Great. All right, here's one from Vera.
How do you get around movies that have been whitewashed? Does it still progress to have such movies that increase exposure to Asian storylines? Yeah, I mean, if they're whitewashed, then there's no representation on screen. There's probably no representation in the background. Anytime I find people who say like, I can play any role, I just call that the Johansson effect. She just thinks she can play every role. I'm like, you can, but then you're taking away the opportunities from somebody else. So if we're talking about Asian roles and Asian that are, either the cartoon, the comic books that are Japanese made, Asian made, like give them a chance. Why aren't we having more auditions for those things? Why aren't you looking at more places? I had someone say they go to casting and they say, I go to Chinatown to look for things. Like, why are you going to Chinatown? You should be going to San Gabriel Valley or Irvine. Like there's huge populations of other Asians. Don't just go to Chinatown. That's a limited mindset thinking.
Is it because us make it limited because we don't let them know that we have all community in different places, not just Chinatown, or is it because of us? The way we portray ourselves?
I think it's just a lack of knowledge. And this person was an Asian person, so I was like really surprised that they didn't like think about that, or we just wanted to push them back. Like, hey, you should look at other places because there's more. That's where we really live. Even in my hometown, which is Ontario, California, it's outside of LA. Like it wasn't very Asian heavy when I grew up, but now I came back after living in New York for so many years. I see Asians around all the time. We're actually going to get our first 99 ranch down the street. I'm like, oh my God, yes. We actually have somewhere else to go. So it's like 20 minutes down the road. So like, it's not our fault. I think it's the Hollywood's responsibility to look at the census, where we're living, where the population is, go to the colleges, even outside, because so many go to the art departments, go to the theater departments. We're growing, but we're not all living in like most of the population is not living in Chinatown or Little Tokyo. Right. So, and then it's like the older generations who have lived there for centuries. So we should be really thinking about spreading that knowledge. And also it can be our responsibility. Should it be our job? No, but it's our responsibility now to make ourselves visible and say that, we represent Irvine in the Inland Empire. I'm finding more people from out here. I'm like, I don't think anybody lived out here. And so there's a position for us to start saying we need to speak up where we're living, because then we find more people and be in the Hollywood industry, not just the actor side. If you are in the actor side, bring other people up. But if you're in the casting, directing, all those places, the creative decision-making roles, like when we have Asians in there, they think like we do. So they know where we're living. We know what to do. If you're making these Asian stories, like why are you having them go to the Ralph's grocery store when you really could be going to the H Mart? Like making those decisions make a lot of difference.
Right. Thank you. So anybody else is watching? We actually have a lot of people watching, about 20 people watching the live right now. Yeah, that's kind of great. Now, I wasn't expecting that many, but that's actually wonderful. So this is the first time we're doing live streaming for OCA Cleveland chapter. Anybody have any questions, feel free to type in right away. It takes about 10 to 20 seconds delay to get to me. So I'm monitoring everything right now at this point and talk to David Moriya. He is a media activist and have a lot of history. I'm trying to think of a couple of things that the reason why we need to do so much and work so hard to have people recognize that the Asian American are also have talented people here and can be able to be in the industry and can do a really good job, besides being stereotypical martial artists or just have an accent. Because for a very good example, a lot of times the Hollywood or the studio asks a Asian American to have certain accent because this is how we look, and they feel like they had to have the accent to connect with the dots. So tell us a little bit how you feel about this whole process.
Say that again. So process of like how they're casting us?
Yeah, because they always, when they cast us, they also want us to have an accent. So what do you feel about that whole process? I think it's kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah, we talked about this on Clubhouse the other day. We called it acting with an Asian accent. And we had a bunch of actors come up and like we talked about it. Like I think there's a reason. There are moments you can do it and you can't. Like there just shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the accent to be a funny joke or to be something that we just want it because it's funny or that's what the character is. Like look at the character. Is that character first generation? Are they an immigrant? Like how bad would their accent be? Is it right for that character? Is it something that are we taking into effect when we're writing these characters? If it's just like, hey, this person's Asian, like do it with an accent, like that, is that really the right choice to make? And are you casting somebody? You say in the writing, you're going to say they're Asian. Okay. What kind of Asian? You say accent. Okay. What kind of accent? What part of China? What part of Vietnam? Japan? Like there's so many different ways that when you just say accent, like there's so much gambit. So,
right.
I think places like shows like Kim's Convenience, like they're supposed to be immigrants. They do have that accent. They're playing that accent. They are British Canadian. They have full like British Canadian accents in real life, but they put on that accent. I think it does it well. But then you have things like for easy of understanding reference is Long Duck Dong. Like no, that's not. They didn't make a real thing. It was just general Asian. They didn't make him a specific thing. They said do it with an accent. So I mean, you have things like Uncle Roger on YouTube. Like he does his accent, but he's basing off his uncle, and I think that's an important part. Like he played into it. Jimmy O Yang, he was on a show that he heard his podcast or something, and he said the director, it was his character and his father, and the father was actually doing a bad accent of what what would be, the language that would be. So he told the director that that's not the right accent. He's doing a Mandarin accent rather than a Cantonese accent, so we should change it. And the director actually said, okay, who can we get to change that? And so they changed it. And Jimmy said, my dad would be right for this character, and he's doing acting stuff. Switched out the role. I mean, sorry for that guy got fired, but switched out the role. But that's what made the difference. And that director, who was not Asian, he said, okay, I don't know about this. I never would have guessed. So he was Jimmy O Yang, advocated for himself and for the language and for the representation. That's what changed the difference. And when we have directors and producers who are like that, who would say, you are the expert on this because I'm not, and let them make the decision, that's when we start to get the change in Hollywood.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. I watch a lot of cartoons. Like, in fact, recently watched the Batman, the Soul of the Dragon, which is a cartoon from is it Marvel? DC, though. DC. And kind of interesting because inside they talk about a monk that Bruce Wayne went to training with. and everybody called the teacher a sensei, but yet he wearing a kung fu uniform and they're using Chinese sword. That's like, okay, probably this is because they are based the whole cartoon on the comic book side of it, which means that back then when they do that comic book, they didn't study enough to understand that's a different world, you know. But then you combine everything together because you want to try to create your own world, but it makes very, very weird. And I feel like it's just not a exact representation of our culture, because now you're mixing Japanese, Chinese, and potentially Hindu all together into one person. Like, why? Same thing with what's a movie? The one that with Doctor Strange.
Right, I was just thinking that.
Same issue. I mean, it's I don't know, because sometimes I feel like it's in the sense of maybe the way we portray it. So, for example, Japanese animation, they always have big eyes, color hair, color eyes, and so a lot of outside media feel like they are drawing to assimilate the European style culture in the Japanese storyline. So maybe this is the reason why we got perceived differently, or maybe because the way we look is just the whole bottom line.
Yeah, I think you're catching on to something that I've noticed too. There's this phrase in Japanese, and I always forget it. Miku Kasawa. I can find it again. But the whole idea is that when you look at cartoons are intentionally made non-ethnical reference. So when you watch it, anybody who's watching kind of puts themselves into that whole thing. But when we start to make it into live action films, then that's when we have to start giving representation to who kind of created it. My biggest example is Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Like, that's a whole Japanese series based, all the Kanto region is based on Japanese city names, and they're eating rice balls and onigiri. Like, that's a very Japanese show. But when they made Detective Pikachu, they put Justice Smith in there. I think they could have given a representation to an Asian person, and it doesn't I think the media thinks like if you put Asians in there, it makes it an Asian film. Like, if you put a black person in there, it doesn't make it a black film. Like, it makes it a film that's really enjoyable. So we have to give it some extra due when we have these representation. And talking about the Sifu and senseis, understanding those languages. And I think what Hollywood ends up doing is saying, well, this is a fictional story. We can kind of do whatever we want with it. And, it doesn't have to be right. That's kind of what they did with Mulan. It's a fictional story. She's a fictional character. So let's give her superpowers. That's when you start giving these issues of who's really telling the story here? Who's giving it the respect that they should be doing these things? So
exactly. And I think Mulan was too short. I mean, they didn't explain too much about the chi energy. They brush off a lot of things about the Chinese culture. There's a problem. I have a problem with the village that she's living. It just doesn't look Chinese or of the according of that indigenous area. It's like, no, we don't. They don't live like that. But I have a voice.
some very few older generations than mine, they do enjoy the show. They like the things, but when we break it down, if you just watch it surface level, you don't think about the rest of the stuff. You won't enjoy it. But if you really break it down and see, especially if you're in the Hollywood space, that becomes ooh, there's a lot of we could do better. We could do
better. Okay, Wayne got this question. Here we go.
We can complain to each other, but beyond that, what can we done to improve accurate and common representation in entertainment media? Well, besides creating your own stuff, which is good, tiring, exhausting, but also very rewarding, it's really good practice. But what we can really do is improve the representation is learning. So when you're creating your scripts, creating your stories, I always try to push people to how are you bringing your identity into this? How are you bringing your culture? This isn't just an Asian person. This isn't just a Japanese American in this story. Really what this is an opportunity to teach about the culture, even just a little bit, whether it be taking off the shoes, eating the right thing, talking with grandma. I mean, you don't have to do those things, but I think what helps the industry understand when they start to learn something about us, they start to resonate a little more. They start to think that we're not just one model minority thing. We're not just one monolith. When we start to separate ourselves from the different cultures and not give us bad representation, We're not making us into villains in ourselves. Even my early scripts, they were all written for white people. Like I thought I was a white man for 25 years. So when I understood my identity and someone had to point out that I'm an Asian person, I was like, oh, I've been writing white people for a long time. I need to write Asian stories, because if I don't write them, someone else will. Some other white person is going to write them instead of me. So when you're writing your stories, like, write not only Asian people, but who your culture is. And if you're going to write somebody else's culture, like, bring them into it and understand, like, ask them more questions. Ask them, what are they doing? What are they eating? How their culture is different. Be curious about someone else's culture, or even your own culture, because there's
David,
so
you
much.
froze it up again.
Oh no, I froze too much.
Yeah, you had to repeat the last part you just talked about.
Anything. I just think you should be more curious about in your culture, other people's culture when we're writing these things, because Hollywood and the people who are going to watch this, they could watch Asian people on screen doing normal contemporary stuff. Like, yes, I think that's great. But if you don't add in a touch of the actual culture, you're not teaching the audience something different about your culture. You're just teaching that all Asians are the same. This is an Asian story. This is a story with Asians in it. And as I like to call it, like the touch of soy sauce. You can put a regular story in there and you add Asians, and that's good representation. But is that story able to add a little bit more, just a line here, a moment there that says, like, this is specific to that culture? Even when they're cooking, what are they cooking? Are they cooking just pizza, or are they cooking something that's very inducive of who that person is? You won't see me always making bao in a film. You might see me making more rice balls. You might see me making more wontons. Like, what are you doing? I think there's just more opportunity, because we're all different, and we need to start teaching people that we are all different. I think that's how we start moving things forward.
So I want to comment. I want to post this up here. Thank you, Margaret Wang. She's one of the civic leader here in the community, and we all respect her. She's our elder.
Awesome. Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, I think we need to start having this conversation. There are great companies like people like Coalition for Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, like CAPE, right? They're CAPE and CAM. I forgot what the acronym stands for, but they're doing great for documentaries. VC, Visual Communications, doing a lot of documentaries, and they host the Asian American Film Festival. But I think what we're trying to do too is add to the conversation, but really point things out. Ask harder questions. Really look at Hollywood from a critical point of view instead of just playing into the system. We want to aggregate all the film festivals together. So I don't want anybody to ever ask me again, like, I want to write this Cambodian story, but I couldn't find a Cambodian writer. I'm like, there's definitely a Cambodian writer out there. Did you go to the Cambodian Film Festival? There's tons of films that are talking about different things, documentaries, writers. So we start to talk with each other, look where the community's at, and then work with each other on these things. And as we start to do that, we start to change Hollywood for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. So we got 3 more questions, I think. Actually, it's pretty cool.
Great.
So awesome. Here you go. Here's one.
Should focus be made to achieve more Asian representation via streaming platforms, since that is where more of the content is appearing? I think you should, this is my opinion, do what you want to do, but there is more content on the streaming services for sure. But I see it as there's more opportunities, because you're trying to fitting a theater model. You're not trying to fit a television network, like a specific time period, like 8 p.m. standard time, that kind of thing. Netflix, if you're doing, not Netflix, but any streaming services, if they want and are doing your show, they are giving you the money up front. They're not really looking for box office numbers, which is what the theatrical model is. In the streaming service, it's more about how many people are purchasing the subscription model and watching your movie. So in my specific situation, I enjoy TV. I enjoy writing TV, not documentaries, but dramas, because not only are we watching an Asian family go through a struggle for more than 10 hours at a time instead of 90 minutes, the TV model gets people to watch things for longer times, which means they're watching the streaming service for a longer time, which means they're paying into the model for a longer time. So if you do the box office numbers, you might be good, but we don't want to only rely on Gold House to promote these films and these gold opens. We love Gold House. I'm definitely in talks with them on other certain projects, but I think we need now, the TV models are dead right now. We need to start thinking about the streaming services that are a really good platform, not only because they're accessible for a lot of people, and you can just turn it on when you can, but the talks around the whole industry, especially since the Paramount decree has been lifted, it means that Netflix and HBO and Amazon can buy out a real theater, a physical theater, and promote something on there first. So they can just push it on, watch a Warner, buy HBO, and see in the theaters, and then you can go watch it in the streaming services later. That's a whole new model that's going to come out within the next couple of years. I mean, that's my prediction. So the theatrical, the streaming services, they're kind of the same, but I think you can't just like ignore the streaming model because it's here to stay, and there's so much money to be made in there for them, but also for us. And since there's a unlimited opportunity for eyeballs to be watching, this is kind of where we can step in and say, hey, we want to watch this, and our parents are going to be able to watch this too. What I would also say, and I want to promote always as well, is dubbing. You know, some people don't like dubbing. People like, you should read the subtitles, learn the language, like all those things. But some people can't read. Some people are dyslexic. They just can't read it for whatever reason. So, and for me, you know, if I'm having a chill night out and I'm not totally focused, if you know what I mean, I can't read the subtitles. And I also want to watch the actor's eyes when they're speaking. So, you know, if you want to do stuff, invest some money into dubbing. Especially if your actors and directors are for it, you know, they can speak both languages. Like, let them try it. Just do a dub over it. Do it very well. So then, if I watch it or somebody else watches it who is averse to the subtitling, they can actually turn on a different language. And with Netflix's and HBO's that have the digital opportunities to change the captions, to change the audio to whatever language, we should be able to be that more accessible to other people. Especially if you only caption in English, then you're negating all the other languages that are out there. So if we start, my thing is, if we start to promote more dubbing in other languages so that everybody is accessible to these things, then we can start like having more eyeballs. And I think that's the whole Asian model before, was that it was all dubbing and it was kind of bad, or it was all subtitles. Some people didn't watch it. Like, I didn't watch everything, and I turn off things. I'm like, I can't sit. I want to multitask and watch, but I can't just do one thing. So we can start. I think if we push that more, the streaming services will. Yeah. Give everybody.
All right. So I actually accidentally skipped Rohit. He actually had two questions. So here's the first.
How can we motivate non-Asian creators to research or get consultation to improve the accuracy of Asian cultures and culture? How can we motivate them? I think it's really speaking out. If you meet somebody, ask them questions. It's not about telling you like you need to do better. It's about, what are you doing to promote Asian stories? And then when they give a pushback and saying, it's a risk, we don't want to do it, we don't know how much money, and there's not enough Asians out there who are working. Like, ask them, is that really what you think? Where have you been looking for Asian representation? Where have you been looking for culture and consultants? If you're trying to go into consulting, like I have been doing for a little bit, is how much have you been researching about your culture and the Asian American experience? If you're just someone who just lives the Asian American experience but doesn't actually know your own culture, the vast diaspora, how far it goes, all the little nooks and crannies of people that you're not really aware of, and what they're doing in their careers, then you're kind of just you're also at a limited base. I wouldn't say you're able to consult somebody else to show them that there's so much depth. If you're only speaking from the monolith experience.
Hello, you're losing audio now.
American, I'm not really.
You froze up. David, you froze up. David, you're muted too.
I think okay, is that better?
Yep, now better.
Okay. Well, something happened. I don't know what's going on. But what I will say is, like, when you ask the questions, try to get them to stumble over themselves. As an activist, I've talked to people about race relations, and when I ended up finding about people talking about race and kind of really shooting down like Black Lives Matter, I'm like, I questioned them and questioned their values. Where did you find that information? Where did you get this? Is that a reputable source? Same thing with Asians. If you in Asian culture, if you're finding somebody who's just Asian, doesn't really recommend with their reconnect with their culture, who hasn't done their research, who hasn't done their who can't teach something about something, then are you representing, and are you able to represent that the best? Are you someone who doesn't know the language? And that's fine, but do you understand the history, the nuances behind it? Like, position yourself as an expert at something. I've been studying Japanese American culture and history for a couple years now, and I can tell you a lot. I can't tell you everything because I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. But I can tell you a lot of different things within the culture, whether what we do, how we eat, how food is traveled, whether you're pre-war or post-war Japanese American, how the intergenerational trauma is has affected someone like me who's fifth generation. There's so much to learn that when you start to learn it, then you position yourself as an expert at it. Then they start to come to you. I told this kind of same speech to a diversity room, which was mostly Black and African American filmmakers, and someone reached out to me. They didn't know about the camps. They're like, I want to talk to you. And she happened to be an executive, really great, that we all know. And I'm looking forward to that conversation because she thought I spoke Japanese because I said I was Japanese American. And she caught her off guard. And I was like, oh, so you don't know that there's that difference. You have that blind side. So when we start to position ourselves to explain and help other communities of color and diversity, equity, inclusion people to say, this is what we can provide because I understand the culture. I'm also consulting for another writer who's not Asian, who wants to write an Asian story, not about an Asian character. So I'm like, okay, we're better here. But she wants to have a lot of culture into it. So, but she knows she shouldn't be writing it all herself. So she came up to me and she talked to me. I can tell her what I know about the Japanese American culture and how that can help in. I can't tell everything about the Japanese culture because I didn't grow up in Japan. Like, my family just hasn't. I can only tell you what I know through Google and community sourcing. Like, what are these people doing? How do you know mochi? How do you write in your chopsticks? There's so many different things and nuances that I can bring, but I can only bring it if I've done the research to do that. I can talk about that all day, but we'll move on to like the next question. I hope that helps.
So Rohit, another question here, and then we have one from David. Anybody else watching this, feel free to ask a question. And we do have another 15 minutes going in. So yeah, awesome. Get your question in before David had to leave us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the questions. We'll answer them all. Is there a perception that if we improve accuracy or more away from stereotypes, it'll be less interesting to general audiences? No. I think not at all. I think it's actually, if we improve the accuracy and move away from stereotypes, you might think that people won't watch it because it's not what they're used to. But if we become more accurate and find the stories and the characters that are very universal, and through the history and like just becoming more educational, like the Black Panthers used to call it edutainment, right? We're educating through entertainment. Mm-hmm. And when we start becoming more accurate and putting the culture into it, that's learning something. So audiences will always very interested in learning about a culture, especially if they want to be more cultural and more diverse. They want to learn. If we're giving them the opportunity to learn and we're able to teach them something, then that becomes very interesting to people. We watch really terrible TV shows like Tiger King, and we're learning a little bit about somebody else. It's a wild show, but we're learning. Same with like Bling Empire. Like, we learned some things about different Asians because they were being authentically themselves. When we start to move away from stereotypes and whitewashing and really just villainizing Asians for what they are, we give people a better understanding of who we are as different people, but also just as American culture. So then, like, if we just keep playing into the stereotypes, they're just going to think we're playing into stereotypes. I use this quote all the time from Malcolm X: the media is the most powerful entity on earth. It has the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent. And so we know that for a fact that we see these things all the time. But when it comes to like stereotyping, it's the same thing. We make the reality the stereotype and the stereotype of reality. When we're only playing the stereotypes, they think that's reality. So we have to move away from that and be more accurate of who we are.
Thank you. All right, here's one from David.
How can we get the Asian supermodel here? I mean, that's already happening, right? We have Shang-Chi coming through and Simu Liu playing that. I'm super excited to see what they're going to do. He's exciting to just kind of speak with. I welcomed him in the club. I made a fool of myself, but you know.
He's on Clubhouse too?
He was on Clubhouse. Yeah, he came in. I know. It was a cool room. He seems like a cool dude, but you know, we're getting that superhero, but we can't just let him be the only superhero, right? We need to start writing stories that make the superheroes. The other kind of thing I kind of thought of right now was Shazam. You know, he wasn't the lead, but there was an Asian dude in there who became like a superhero. I was like, that's cool. You know, we're going to see more things like the Cowboy Bebop live action thing with John Cho, right? John Cho. He's coming in. He's playing that, and like that could also be like a superhero. You know, if I could do the plug, like, can't think what is a superhero? Do they have magical powers, or are they using martial arts? Like, because recently it's been like Batman using martial arts, and he's not Asian, and that's his superpower, is that he kind of has that ability. So, so what do you count as a superhero? But I do think we should have more that have superpowers and doing cool things. Can't just be the Shang-Chi's. It should be more newer characters, not even based off IP. So my question to anybody who's a screenwriter and writing, how are you promoting superheroes in the Asian American space, and what makes it different? So I think that's something to think about.
Yeah, totally. So here's another question. I just popped on my screen.
I keep seeing the two. The increasing global connected audience. Do you see growing opportunities for U.S. Asian entertainment to Asian countries? Pros and cons. Yeah, I think that's a hard topic to come through, and I haven't really gathered my full vernacular for it. But the whole Hollywood model has kind of thought about how does it work in the Chinese market, and that's a really good question to ask, because the Chinese market didn't like Mulan very well. They didn't like The Farewell as much, or Crazy Rich Asians. So how is that really playing to the model of, if we're doing better, how can we get that market as well? And that's a confusing question, because some people have said, they've done the polls, like they didn't mind Scarlett Johansson playing those roles, and they actually kind of look down upon Asian Americans. They don't see us as full Asians. So, you know, I think when we start to be more accurate and tell very interesting stories about who we are, but also how it connects with the Asian culture in Asia, we get to break into crossing the divide. I think it's the same thing with cross-community collaborations within the Black and Asian solidarity. We need to start having more of those. But the Asian and Asian American solidarity, when we start to tell, like, we're still the same, but if you start to look at it, we're different, but we still come from the same place of a lot of culture. We want to continue that culture. But, you know, I was born here. My family was born here. We don't have ties to Japan, but at the same time, I feel so connected, because that is like a homeland. You know, a lot of people don't have that. The same thing. I don't have that same connection. I've never been to Japan. My family's never been to Japan for multiple generations. So, but do I want to feel accepted? Yes. And I think the way to bridge that divide is we start telling stories about ourselves and why we are like this, and how your immigrant parents are telling these stories, why they came to America. Like, we didn't abandon, you know, these Asian countries. We came to America for finding a different life and to send money back home. Like, that was a lot of these cultures have done. So when we're bridging that divide, the pros is that hopefully that we will have a better unity in understanding that Asians are Asians, depending on where they're at. The cons, it's going to be an uphill struggle. You know, I think a part of it is going back to dubbing. I think we need to have more dubbing, so we look at the stories, not think it's not accessible, and telling better stories. Like, don't let non-Asians write these stories and be that the market for there, because when they have that, they're like, this isn't the story. Something's wrong about it. Whether the makeup, the characters, the symbolism, like Asian films, a lot of it's symbolism, because they want to see a color. Purple in America and in Europe is royalty, and so is gold. But in Japan, it's horror. So you can't have these symbols. When we start to cross the divide into American cinema, Asian American cinema, when we start to add those symbols, and that it does resonate and doesn't, and not making the story about the symbolism, but that it does represent a part of it, we start to get that that connective into the other cultures, because we do understand and that there needs to be a question. I had another friend do some pictures, and I was like, did you think about color? Because color makes a difference. So,
Yep. So
no.
just a quick comment from
Quick no, Shazam. That I do need to go back and watch that Shaquille O'Neal movie. I believe it was Shazam. It's that recent movie that came out in 2017, 2018.
Right, that's a new one.
He gets the PR. It's like the same. I think it's a spin-off from that. There was little dude. He was the kid from Fresh Off the Boat, and he played that role. But he was like the gamer, and I was like, okay, another stereotype gamer, quiet kid. But then he got a superpower, and I was like, oh yeah, he's strong. He's a cool dude. Like, I want to see more of that.
Totally. So, I was thinking about the Mulan part of it, because China make maybe, I think, 7 versions of Mulan, which I watched them all. And potentially the reason why probably the actual Disney Mulan didn't do well, because Chinese people felt like they can do a better job with Mulan. Yeah. But here's the quite interesting thing about it. Why is Great Wall did well in China, but did bomb in here in the United States? You know what I'm saying? You know the movie I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I haven't even seen the Great Wall, but I know like the issue behind it. I mean, Matt Damon and stuff. I think the reason why it did well, and this is perception. I don't really know all the stats or anything, so take it with a grain of rice, as I say. They want to see those big movie stars, right? The Hollywood stars. It's for them, it's foreign, right? For them, it's an American star. They're really, really rich, right? Some Asian countries it's all about the money and the face, and so they know that face. Matt Damon's been on there forever, and so it's in their zeitgeist and their popularity. So when you go into the film and talking about their story, they're like, well, it's telling our story, and there's someone famous, right? It's more about the notoriety than it is about the accuracy. Here, we look at it and like, well, that's a problem. We want to know about that story, but this white dude who's not Asian, who wouldn't be there during that time, like, why is this person in there? Why are we following this white character? We're just now getting woke enough to talk about and critique these things as we should, but we're just now getting a huge language, and a part of what Strong Asian Lead's mission is to really come together, talk about these things. Don't just hear and say, well, let's promote it because it's Asian representation. Like, let's promote it, but let's also take it apart and say, how could we do better next time? If we don't ask the question to do better, we won't get there.
Exactly. So, it's actually a big shocking to me when the Oscar consider one of the Korean American movie as a foreign movie, even though it's shot in the United States with Korean American actors. You tell us a little bit about that. I don't think a lot of people knows about that storyline either.
Oh yeah, if you don't know about Manali, if I'm saying that with the right phrase, Manali is a Korean American story, right, about immigrants who come to America to go to Arkansas to live a better life. Directed by Korean Americans and Asian Americans, acted with Korean Americans. They had, Korean people come in and talk dialogue from Korea. Made with American money, right? A24 produced it. Directed by Asian Americans. Set in Arkansas. Shot in Oklahoma. But the Golden Globes put it in the foreign language category. So not only does that give us perpetuate the perpetual foreigner syndrome, saying this is not an American film, but they only used their excuse was that it's 50% in Korean, which is a foreign language. But Korean, there's so many people who speak Korean in America, and there is no one unified language in the United States. The United States has 350 different languages. And there's no one like national language. So to say that this is a foreign film or foreign language film, like that just perpetuates more of the stereotype of what it is, which then trickles down to understanding that because it's foreign language, not many people are going to go watch it as much. Not going to people put it in the movies. It made a Sundance Award. I don't know which one, but it rocked Sundance for a long time. So whether this is a bad PR on Global Golden Globes part, or maybe that was the reason why they did it, to have this conversation and just to push the needle forward, doesn't matter. What it did for a lot of society is to think that this is a foreign film, and it ruptured the Asian Americans to say, like, we need to talk about this because that's wrong. So when we start to see these things, we can't just let them go by. We have to talk about them.
Way to talk about it. All right, we got one more question, then we're going to have you talk about how people can reach you. So
sure. how does the traditional views towards acting as a profession limit the amount of Asian actors in the industry? Has there been more Asian Americans registered as actors? Yeah, that's a good question. No, I would say that they're not as many registered. If you're talking about like the Actors Guild and SAG-AFTRA, there's not as many. I think the percentages would tell you that. And part of that is the systemic problems, whether it's casting that says we should put a white person in here instead because it'll market better, because we'll get more money, we'll get more things. There's that problem. There are people who say we'll do it with an accent, and then like, well, that's a stereotype. And so some actors don't want to take it. Profession limit about actors, like there are a really good handful of professional actors. Some of them are actually aging out and retiring. So we're getting this new small wave, but there should just be more in general. When we start creating more shows, talking about the system and writing stories for Asians, we're going to start seeing more Asians come up. It might be new voices, new actors. I'm finding new actors all the time on Clubhouse. Like I've never heard their name, but they're saying like, oh, you're a good voice actor. You've done a lot of martial arts, amazing people. So we're going to start seeing them come up. But I think it's also really important for them to actors to start leaning into their Asianness. I think over time we've said, well, let's lean into Americanness because they don't want to hear or see from Asians. But now we need to start leaning into it and saying, do you know your culture? Because when they start saying we need a Japanese American, are you someone who understands Japanese American culture to bring that in? Because they're starting to ask for the accuracy. We need to bring that accuracy. If we're just saying I'm Japanese American, but I don't know, I'm more American than I am Japanese, I don't really know any of the culture, then is that the person we want to bring in for the representation? Because not only you can put them on screen, they can act very well, the story might still be good, but it could be better if someone was able to and make a decision, say something like Jimmy O Yang. He made a decision to say, this accent is wrong. Is it something for me to go and say, well, that rice cooker isn't the right kind of rice cooker. That's not a one Japanese have. They don't have the multiple buttons. The Japanese Americans are very long-term Japanese Americans who have been here for over a couple of generations don't have the buttons and the musical rice cookers. We have the one button, and that's all. That's it. So how we can bring in that representation and the understanding of the culture, but we need to be professionals about it as well. And so speaking up for ourselves, speaking up for others, and also giving others the opportunity. If you're auditioning for a Korean role but you're not Korean, you can do it. But I've heard really great stories, and I think this is how it should be done, and saying, I might be good, you might be asking me for the role, but I really think you should go to this person because they're better and they're Korean. So like we have to look out for one another as well. The industry not yet, but we need to start doing it for ourselves because they're not going to do it for us.
Totally, yeah. Luckily, you just froze in the last part of it, so people can still hear you. But if anybody who would like to reach out to you directly, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. We're Strong Asian Lead at any of the socials. DM me on Instagram is probably the easiest way to get to me. You can go to our website at strongasianlead.com. It's not fully developed yet, or I'm still having to fix all the languages, but the submission and email submissions still work. You can reach out to me if you're an emerging screenwriter and you want to help with your career and understanding how you can position yourself and using your identity as an asset for your upcoming managers. Like some people just don't know how managers work. So I call myself like a pre-manager. Like I'm not your manager, but I'll help you get one to think about your career as a career. This, at the end of the day, this is a business. You can think about art as much as you want, but when you start thinking about art and you want to do more art, you want to get paid for your art, and to get paid for your art, to make more art, it's a business. So when we start thinking about how the business works, we can start positioning ourselves as very understanding of the industry. And then that helps a manager understand, this person understands how I work, how the industry works. They're going to help me to get them better representation and get them more money. So that's what I can do. If you're a company, if you know a company that an industry company that's like needing more Asians, just to think about Asian stories because they're looking for that thing. We work with diversity, equity, inclusion in their departments because a lot of times they say we're promoting Black and brown stories. As an Asian, I don't identify with the brown label. If anything, it's the yellow label. But Black, brown, and Asian, we need to say all three because then that includes this other group. So you can, again, that's kind of what we do in our side. Our Instagram page is working right now. You can DM me there. We're now the lead campaign manager for Bruce Lee's Warrior, so you're going to start seeing a lot of that. As a plug here, that's the biggest plug right now is that if you have HBO Max, watch Warrior. It's based off Bruce Lee's writings. Shannon Lee, his daughter, is the executive producer along with Justin Lin. It's a badass show. Like a bunch of dudes kicking ass, excuse my language, and great women, just strong women characters. Talking about 1870s Chinatown in San Francisco. So again, it's going back to the whole marketing thing, but HBO bought out Showtime, but they don't have a third season set up yet. If you go to my Instagram page, Strong Asian Lead, at Strong Asian Lead, the link to the change.org petition is there. Please sign it. We only need a couple 1,000 more signatures. We're almost there. But the best thing to do is really tell your friends about the show. Watch the show yourself. There's 2 full seasons. I'm still binging it. It's a long show, but it's really good. It gets even better in the second season. So, that helps push their show. When we start thinking about the streaming models, it's all about viewership and subscriptions. So, when you're watching these things, watch other shows, watch things that are not. I grew up watching Friends and How I Met Your Mother and all these, The Office. But start changing your channel because the algorithms in the streaming services aren't thinking about the Asian style and what you're watching. Start watching other things. There's tons of things to watch in, and when you start doing that and changing your channels into something that's more Asian, not only are you promoting the viewership of the Asian stories, but you're also educating yourself on what's out there and what could be done. There's so much more to be watched, and I haven't even gone through half of it. So keep watching what's new coming, always up to date what's going on. We're going to try to do better about promoting something like Boogie, which is Eddie Huang's new movie that's coming out. It looks super dope. But also look at all the classics where you can watch the Joella couple all day, but what about 2009 Mulan or the 1932 Mulan? Those things to watch, or Better Luck Tomorrow, or just so many things to search upon that aren't in the top 10. That's like Hollywood standards. Let's look at what we should be watching and look at their film festivals. The Cambodian Film Festival is great. The Asian American Film Festivals. Look at your local film festivals that are Asian, because there's all over the country they're there. So, just watch soon, appreciate, know the names of people, these directors, they're coming up, and you're going to want to know who I saw their first ones. And that's really important. So I don't like to promote myself too much. I like to promote other people, but you can always reach out to me and we can work together, or just, say thanks and whatnot.
Thank you very much, David. I mean, you gave us a very, very great, wonderful 1 hour educational and learning about media industry and so on. Really appreciate the time you spent with us and being here live stream. I think we'll bring you back again, because I think this is really, really very big topic to just cram into 1 hour.
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking me that. And if everybody doesn't know, this is my first live stream, so I'm not super nervous, but this is a normal thing, but this is cool. One thing I'd like to say too, if you're not, we've mentioned a couple of times on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is the drop-in social media app. It's no texting, no photos, no video. You don't have to look good like I do right now. You just drop in and ask questions. Listen, it's like a podcast or live radio, but you can ask questions and call in. So I host the Strong Asian Lead Clubhouse on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Tuesdays are our official meetings. We talk about different things, just like we did here today. On Thursdays are our Asian Writers Room. If you're already on Clubhouse, Kate is also on there. They're having a Clubhouse tonight at 5 or 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So they always have great conversations too. So, once you start doing and consuming and learning and connecting with people, we start to educate ourselves. So thank you everybody for listening in. I saw your questions, I saw your comments. This is really great, and I'm glad to get the feedback. So thanks for all listening.
Thank you. I'm going to shut off the live stream. David, stick around for a second.